amazing characters, amazing film, fantastic writing. Could you possibly make this film now? Why or why not? And if so, what would you have to change to get it to be made?
You cannot make this film now. There's so much about this movie that was just like, lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And you just can't recreate that.
Right.
You could tell a story like this now, but it would be vastly different. And I think about that maybe not so much from this perspective of the characters. Like, things are different now. There's more light being shed on bullying and sexual harassment and things like that. So maybe you can't safely tell such a lighthearted story that includes those elements right now.
Sure.
But I think the bigger thing, and this might stray from your question, so I'm sorry about that, but the bigger thing is it would be hard to tell this story in the age of the internet. Because there's so much like naivety, I don't know. And then just like innocence and just not knowing so much about what's going on in the entire world and with technology and stuff like that. Like when Marty sees the DeLorean for the first time and just this whole idea of a time machine, his mind is completely blown. And if there exists an internet where you can waste your hours away looking up stuff and reading about that to begin with, maybe it's not quite as big a deal when you see it for the first time. So it may not be that big a deal, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind is information is so readily available right now and the world has gotten smaller that a story like this with so much wonder attached to it may not play as well.
I look at this from almost like a movie making standpoint and a marketing standpoint.
Yeah.
I don't think a film like this would succeed today. And it kind of goes back to the idea of me saying that for the first 30 minutes of this film, you don't know where it's going. And how do you tell people it's a sci-fi film? Do you tell people it's a comedy? That's a difficult thing. People like to categorize film more these days. And at the same time, I feel like the great thing about this movie is the lack of special effects. I think that when they do, like, some stuff is cheesy, right? Like he holds his hand in front of his face, and it's just like, this is cringy.
Yeah.
But like the amount of special effects that they would probably want to feed into this film seems overwhelming. I really liked the fact that they built the DeLorean out. That like when you looked inside of that DeLorean, they had made it that way, and it seemed tangible. I really liked the fact that when the car takes off, it leaves the fire trails. When it comes back, it has the frost, and there's not like this weird vortex that it has to go through or anything. Right. It just happened. You don't need to see it. Those kinds of things would be disruptive to the rest of the story. I just don't think this film would be as successful. I don't think a remake would be as successful.
Right. Yeah.
No, it can't happen.
I agree. If you were going to try and make it, you'd have to do a throwback. But we interpret the 80s today differently than the 80s interpreted the 80s at the time. So even if you do a throwback, it's not going to be interpreted correctly, right?
Right.
We're going to look at things today, and we're going like this happened to Stranger Things. Like a bunch of people complained about it being. There was a lot of different complaints, right? Like there probably wasn't enough female representation. There wasn't enough people of color in it, right? Like all of these things. And I think that they adjusted that in season 2 and like kind of made amends for some of that stuff. But I think we'd have to ask ourselves too, like, well, what was the 80s actually like in that? What was that decade actually like? And what was bad and good about that? Like there were some things that were good, but there were some things that were just bad about every decade. Pick your thing, because it's going to be some bad and there's going to be some good. And I just don't think it would feel real or true if you told the same story in the same way today. Have you guys seen Safety Not Guaranteed? It's Aubrey Plaza and some other dude. It's one of the Star Wars directors who may have been
Colin
fired.
Trevorrow.
Yeah, Trevorrow. That's today's version of this film. But it's way different. It's skeptical, right? Like we just talked about the Doc Marty relationship and went, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that is weird, right?
Yeah.
Like that is strange. But in the 80s, that wasn't as big of a deal. Like, you know what I mean? Like now you look at it and like the whole Safety Not Guaranteed thing is like this girl who's taking a risk with this guy who she thinks may be a weirdo. Yeah. Right? Like, and she's like, I don't know if he's a weirdo, but she takes it. She's cautious. you don't see any caution between Doc and Marty. It's all adventure. You know,
Right.
it's like, oh, this is fun. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, yeah, Doc, I'll videotape this. Like, crazy, like Libyans, like, which by the way, I doubt are portrayed by Lebanese people, like,
No,
or Libyans, I should say. Libyans. I'm getting it even probably wrong. But I'm pretty sure that's not the case. We just have a different context, and there's no way that we could bring our context. But if we tried to bring the 80s context, everybody would be like, no, that's not it.
Even if you throw the whole 80s thing out and just try and make a movie that's as well-rounded as this today, you don't see that. Like you said, Josh, there's just so much attempt to categorize things and to pick a genre.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, we had a lot of movies like this.
Yeah.
Like there's a Raiders of the Lost Ark poster right here.
Right.
It was like that.
Right.
You had suspense, action, adventure, comedy, horror, like all in one movie.
I think that also goes with the changing of the rating system.
Yeah.
In the 80s. Once we changed the rating systems and everything wasn't either G or PG, even if you look at old Universal horror, like you could take kids to go see Dracula. Come on, like it's not that scary. But you would never take a kid to go see Saw. That would be freaky.
Yeah.
Unless you're a sociopath. But like that's what almost killed it. Movies were, up until the mid 80s, a family affair.
Yeah.
And then once you took that away and you started pulling towards the PG-13, the R rating, you started to kind of categorize things as what's family, then what's not family, then, you know, what genre. Like, okay, it's an R-rated film that's a horror film. Mm-hmm. Now I know what I'm going to go see. That totally kills the vibe of being like, it's an adventure film.
Yeah.
What's it about? Who cares?
Right.
And I wonder if we're going to see that come back, because in a lot of ways it feels like the 80s was a reaction to the 70s, right?
Yes.
Which was very dark and edgy and lots of boundary pushing.
I do think, though, when you're talking about a resurgence, I think we saw that, especially in the 2000s, with the PG-13 format, and it still exists. I mean, like Pirates of the Caribbean, I would consider that a family, adventure, where it has comedy elements, it has a romance, it has all those things. Guardians of the Galaxy. Now that we're out of the 2000s and deep into the 2010s, we're now seeing that pull even further. Like, okay, the subgenre of superhero films has been around for a while. Now, how do we genreify that?
Yeah.
And then you've got the Deadpool, Logan stuff where it's like, well, now you can't show kids this.
Yep.
And so we're just continuing to, like, as we try and bond it all back together, it just gets even more segregated.
Exactly.
And even all that stuff points to the whole idea of only making movies based on these existing properties that we know people like.
Could Star Wars, The Force Awakens, or The Last Jedi, either one now that we're getting towards it, could those films even exist in the format that they're being told?
Right.
If the original series had not told them that way.
Exactly.
Would they be more Star Trek sci-fi than more family
or more
adventure?
like Matrix-y or
They would, because we tend to see sci-fi as much more hard sci-fi now than this kind of fun, like 88 miles an hour, you can go whenever you want.
Yeah.
That'll be fine.
Yeah. To your point about the internet, I guested on the Story Cauldron podcast and talked about the Indiana Jones films, all three of them, the whole trilogy, which is, well, there's 4 of them, but the 3 of them that matter. And the fact that, like, the world felt big enough when those films came out that there was like, yeah, maybe there is like some kind of like special thing off in the middle of nowhere. Nowadays, I expect someone to have YouTubed the area of the world that I'd have never seen before.
Yeah.
Right.
I expect there to be like an actual YouTuber who's like, here's what it looks like in wherever today. That just shrinks down. Our suspension of disbelief is almost impossible now.
Yeah.
We just hope now that nobody tries to remake this film.